Let's get started on Chapter 10, Introduction to Network Security. In this chapter, we will discuss threats, levels of security, authentication and authorization, group policy, password policies, permissions, EFS, the encrypted file system, and IPSec, IP security, firewall and firewall rules, malware, wireless security, and physical security. Let's start by discussing threats. In general, there are two types of threats: intentional threats and unintentional threats. Intentional threats would include malicious damage to our data files or data theft, stealing of theft of credit card numbers. Intentional theft is done by bad guys. But another threat is unintentional threats, such as a power loss or a hardware failure, and it is our job to protect against all kinds of threats. It is our job to try to mitigate these threats. Let's look at the 5 different levels of security, which we will be discussing in this chapter. Login security, whether or not a user can log on. File security, who can access which file. Network security, the encryption of data as it goes across the wire. Internet security, meaning firewalls. And physical security, which is an easy one to overlook. Let's start out with discussing login security, implementing secure authentication. Remember, authentication, to be authenticated, means to be logged in. The security policy configures our authentication security. A group policy object is a configuration file which is located on the domain controller and which can be used to configure all users and all computers in the domain. We can use group policy to configure our password policies, such as password length and password age. If we go to the group policy editor and we select security settings and we go into password policies and we select the minimum password length, we can configure it such that the user must have a password and it must be a certain length, such as 5 characters or 7 characters or 8 characters. And also we can require that the user must change the password every 90 days or every 180 days. And you notice there's an item here that says account lockout, discussed on page 469. Account lockout is when a bad guy is trying to break in just by guessing passwords. And if we configure account lockout threshold and we set that value to be 5, then the account will lock after 5 invalid login attempts. For how long? If I click on OK, we can see that if somebody is guessing passwords and they get the password wrong 5 times in a 30-minute period of time, then that account will be locked for 1,440 minutes, which is 24 hours. This is the account lockout policy, which is configured within group policy. Another variable we can configure to tighten login security is login hours. And we looked at this in a previous chapter. We saw that if Bob only needs to log in from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, then we only give him the permission to log in at that time. This is what they call the principle of least privilege. If he's never going to log in from midnight until 5 a.m., then there's no sense in us giving him the permission to log in from midnight till 5 a.m. And the advantage there is that means that a bad guy cannot possibly log in using Bob's account from midnight till 4 a.m. It just reduces by a little bit the threat of a bad guy logging in at off hours using Bob's account. To tighten login security, we can increase the required password length, or we can decrease the frequency, decrease the time in which the user must change the password, and we can restrict login time. So that's called a login security or authentication security. Now let's look at securing access to data, securing access to confidential files such as bank accounts or payroll. And this falls under the general heading of authorization. Authorizing access to files and folders, NTFS permissions, and I know we've already talked about NTFS permissions. Here's an example of NTFS permissions. We can see, here's the payroll folder, and that the accountants group has full permissions, has full control over the payroll folder. So NTFS permissions controls who gets to which files. In NTFS permissions, we have three variables to configure. What file are we talking about? For example, the inventory database. Which people we're talking about giving permissions to, in this example, everyone. And what permissions do we want to give? In this example, we will give the read permission. The inventory database is not confidential. We want everybody to be able to look at the inventory database to see what we have for sale, but the only permission that they will have is to simply read to see what's there. And then a folder like the payroll database, that's highly confidential, so everyone will not have any permissions at all. The accountants group will have permissions, and they will have the read and the write permission. And then the administrators group will have full control to all files. NTFS permissions controls access to confidential files. Now let's look at encryption, EFS, the encrypted file system, and IPSec. EFS is used to encrypt a file or an entire folder which is stored on the hard disk. If I want to encrypt this folder called inventory, I right-click on the folder, under the General tab, under the Advanced tab, under the Advanced button, I click on the checkbox that says Encrypt Contents to Secure Data, and that will encrypt that folder and everything that's in the folder. So if somebody looks at it, it's not going to do them any good because it doesn't make any sense, because it's encrypted, it's scrambled up. EFS, the encrypted file system, encrypts files and folders which are on the hard disk, and they protect you against the threat that somebody might steal your computer, steal your hard disk, and carry it away. And if it's encrypted, it's not going to do them any good. That's encrypting files which are on the hard disk. Now, let's look at another threat, the threat of eavesdropping or wiretapping. The example is that a bad guy with a protocol analyzer has tapped into the wire. And then if he does, then he can steal credit card numbers or passwords which go over the wire. So what we can do is we can encrypt the data which goes over the wire. And that is called IPSec, for IP security. You know what TCP/IP is. Well, IP is the Internet Protocol. So IPSec means TCP/IP traffic is encrypted. If we look at the local group policy editor of this Windows 7 machine right here, under security settings, under IPSec policies, we can see that the policy secure IP traffic, which is used to encrypt IP traffic, is currently assigned. EFS encrypts data which is stored on the hard disk, and it protects you against a stolen hard disk. And IPSec encrypts data which goes over the wire, and it protects you against a bad guy who is wiretapping and using a protocol analyzer. Now let's discuss another threat, the threat of intrusion from the internet. A firewall. What is a firewall? A firewall is a piece of software which is used to block unwanted traffic. Frequently internet traffic, incoming internet traffic. We can configure a firewall on a router, configure a firewall on a server. We can even configure a firewall on a workstation. To enable a firewall, we go into Control Panel, and under System and Security, we select Windows Firewall. And if I select Turn Windows Firewall on or off, you can see in this example the firewall is currently disabled. If I select Turn on Windows Firewall, I can turn on the Windows Firewall for the domain network settings, for the private network settings, and for the public network settings. When the firewall is enabled, then that will block all incoming internet traffic except return traffic. The reason we have the firewall is so nobody can come into our network, nobody can come into our server and access our confidential data. But what accept return traffic means is that if a user wants to download a file from a website, then that traffic will be allowed. When a firewall is basically enabled, it blocks all incoming traffic except return traffic. This leads to the question, what if you do want to allow certain types of traffic to come into your network, particularly web traffic? Most organizations have web pages internal to their organizations, so they would like to block all incoming traffic except web traffic. So to allow web traffic, we create a firewall rule. The purpose of a firewall rule is to allow or block traffic. A firewall rule is an if-then statement that's used to allow or block traffic. And an example would be if port number is equal to 80, which is web traffic, then the traffic will be allowed. A firewall is a piece of software that looks at every packet which comes through the firewall, and it examines the packet. And if the packet is web traffic, then it will be allowed. So to enable a rule that will allow web traffic through the firewall, then we go to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security, and I will configure this on a Windows 2012 server, but you could do it on a Windows 7 server as well, Windows 7 workstation as well. I go to Server Manager, and under Tools, I go to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. And then I select Inbound Rules, and I select the rule, notice Inbound Rules, that says Worldwide Web Service. I right-click on that and select Properties. And this rule that I'm going to enable says Worldwide Web Services, HTTP traffic in. And this allows internet traffic, TCP port 80. This rule is enabled, and does this rule block or allow? You can see that this rule allows. So this is a rule that is enabled, and it allows web traffic, meaning port number 80. If you click on the tab that says Ports and Protocols, you can see that the port is port number 80, which we remember is web traffic. But let's look a little more closely at what is a port. A port is a field in an IP header that identifies the program or service that that packet is going to. So let's review what's a packet. A packet is a message which is sent from one computer to the next. And the packet is made up of data information, such as ABC, and header information. And the header information is going to include the IP address of the computer that the packet is destined to. And the header also includes the port number. And what the port number does is it identifies the destination program that the packet is going to. If it is port number 80, then it is going to the web page on this computer. Port number 21 is FTP traffic. A firewall can allow or disallow traffic based upon port number. A firewall rule is an if-then statement that allows or disallows traffic based upon port number, or it can also allow or block traffic based upon IP address. One example is if it's port number, if the packet is port number 80, then allow. Or if we wanted to block traffic from a particular network, we could create a firewall that says if source network equals 10.25.0.0, then deny. And then that would block all traffic coming from network 10.25. Firewall terminology. These things all mean the same thing. When we allow a program through a firewall, such as the Internet Explorer, then what we're doing is we are opening a port in the firewall. And another way to phrase that is punching a hole in the firewall. When we punch a hole in the firewall, we are opening a port in the firewall. And what that does is it allows traffic, such as web traffic, to go through the firewall. Now let's discuss malware. Mal means bad. So malfunction would be a bad function. Malware is bad software. Virus is malware which is used to damage your computer software. There's not any profit in making viruses. If you make a virus, it'll damage somebody else's computer. Now, a Trojan horse is a piece of malware that's used to steal usernames and passwords. There is profit in making Trojan horses. And spyware is software that gets installed on your computer and you don't even know it. And it spies on you, it tracks your web surfing habits, and it takes control of your computer, can take you to websites that you never wanted to go to in the first place and try to sell you something that you don't want. If we go to Microsoft.com under antivirus partners for Windows 7 and we scroll down, we can see there's a lot of antivirus software out there. For example, at this college, we use McAfee. McAfee is the #1 antivirus, or I should just say anti-malware software on the market. #2 is Norton from Symantec. They make antivirus software. It does anti-spyware and anti-bot protection. And you got to pay for these. Here's one, $40 per year. Now, Microsoft has their own antivirus software, which is called Microsoft Security Essentials. If we select Microsoft Security Essentials, the web page says, proven antivirus protection for free. That's what I need. And sure is cheaper than buying McAfee or Norton antivirus. So I can download it and save it to a USB drive or install it on this computer right here. I will install it on this computer here. And then when I do, it takes me to the Microsoft Security Essentials antivirus software, anti-malware software. I click on Scan Now, and you can see it is scanning the system. And now it shows that the scan is complete and no threats were detected on the computer. Malware, such as virus or Trojan horse or spyware, is software that can damage your computer. And antivirus software, also known as anti-malware software, such as McAfee or Norton or Microsoft Security Essentials, is designed to get rid of the malware which is on your computer. Wireless security, we've already discussed in this course. In wireless security, we disable service set identifier broadcasting on the wireless access point so not just anybody can connect to it. Then we enable encryption on the wireless access point, enable encryption on the workstations. We type in a passphrase on the wireless access point, same passphrase on the workstations. And if we want, we can implement MAC address filtering. And as you recall, a MAC address is a serial number which is burned into the network interface card on a computer. DOS, denial of service attack. Don't confuse this with DOS, which is capital D, capital O, capital S. That's an operating system. Denial of service attack is whereby you're a bad guy and you want to take down somebody's website. And You can't break in because you can't guess the password. But what you can do is just send them tons and tons and tons of information. Like you can just try to ping them and ping them. And if you get enough computers pinging one computer, you can't really damage that computer. But if you're pinging somebody's website, then it's so overwhelmed with pings, then nobody else can get into the website. So if you're mad at somebody, some company, and they won't pay any attention to you, if you ping their website with a whole bunch of computers, then that will flood them with information, and it won't hurt them, but it will prevent any of their other customers from getting through. This is called a denial of service attack. Physical security. This is the one that's so easy to forget. I was on a job one time, and they had passwords and antivirus software and everything. And then one day, in the middle of the day, someone strolled into the server room just acting like he knew what he was doing, picked up a $20,000 server, unplugged it, smiled at the people, how you doing, walked out, and then nobody even knew who he was. And he just walked in and carried away a $20,000 server, and that's because there was no lock on the server room. Well, here at the Community College of Baltimore County, not only do we have a lock on the server room, but we have key card access. But physical security is an easy one to overlook. How about air conditioning in the server room? How is that physical security? If the air conditioning goes out in the server room, then those servers are going to overheat and they're going to crash. And our job is to protect those servers from all kinds of threats, including the air conditioning from going out. So it's our job to make sure that we have air conditioning in the server room. In fact, here at CCBC, we got great big electric fans that we can plug into a generator just in case the whole building air conditioning goes out. UPS, uninterruptible power supply, which provides power in case the power goes out. And you might think this isn't security. Yes, it is, because physical security makes sure that you've got power. Disk mirroring is a form of physical security, because in disk mirroring, you have two disks, one is mirrored to the other. If the little motor goes out in the first hard disk, that would be considered physical security. It's a physical failure. If the little motor goes out in the first hard disk, that's okay. We have a second hard disk. So even disk mirroring falls into the category of physical security. And I know we talked about backup in the previous chapter. If we do a backup to an off-site facility, then that protects against the threat of the entire building burning down. Chapter 10. Summary. In this chapter, we looked at different threats, and we saw that it is our job to try to mitigate threats. We looked at levels of security, at authentication and authorization. We looked at group policy to configure password policies. We saw that NTFS permissions can protect against unauthorized access to confidential files. EFS encrypts files on the hard disk. IPSec encrypts data which goes over the wire. Firewall and firewall rules can allow or disallow traffic based upon port number or IP address. Malware is software designed to damage your computer. We reviewed wireless security, and we looked at the one which is so easy to overlook, physical security. And this concludes Chapter 10. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.